So this Shabbat, it's the middle of the summer. I knew we'd be a smaller crowd. I wanted to do something different than a sermon. I wanted to study a little bit with all of you. And so you probably have a handout in your Siddur. If you happen to grab one without a handout, I have some extras. I'll just place them right here. You can feel free to come and grab it. It's just some excerpts from this week's Parsha. So this Shabbat, we are reading from Pinchas, which actually, so Pinchas was this priest. He was a grandson of Aaron. And in the previous Parsha, there's more. Oh, great. In the previous Parsha, he is involved in a kind of difficult scene where Israel is kind of around the Midianites and their enemies, and it's not a good thing. And God gets very upset because the Jewish men, the Israelite men, are having some fun with the Midianite women. And it's not clear exactly what that looks like, but it probably wasn't very respectful. But Pinchas really is a zealot in the tradition, and he comes in. And let's take a look at this first verse, this first section here. So we're in the midst of this scene, and God's very mad and tells the leaders that they have to sort of kill all of the Israelites that are involved in this. So it's a violent scene. And then we have this. Just then an Israelite man came and presented a Midianite woman to his brothers. And Moses and the whole Israelite community saw this as they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Pinchas, who, as I said, is a priest and was Aaron's grandson, saw this and rose from the midst of the community. Taking a spear in his hand, he followed the Israelite man into, there's a strange word, kuba, maybe it's a cave or a chamber of some kind, and stabbed them, the Israelite man and the woman, through the belly. So it's a graphic, intense scene, right? They're doing this thing that God doesn't like, and Pinchas takes it into his own hands to go and deliver God's wrath, as it were. We call that a zealot. And then in this week's portion, just a couple of chapters later, we get this totally different story, the daughters of Zelophehad. So these 5 women come forward. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said to the leaders, "Our dad died in the wilderness, and he was not one of those who joined the rebellion with Korach. He died through his own offense, and he had no sons. Why should our father's name be withdrawn from the midst of his clan just because he had no son? Give us a holding amidst our father's brothers." So these daughters are upset because the law at the time does not allow them to inherit their father's estate. And they're upset about it, rightfully so. And they go to the leaders and they demand justice. So I've picked both of these texts because they kind of share this space in the Torah, but they're very different, right? One is a religious zealot, kind of making change with violence. And the other is these women who protest and speak truth to power. I want you to turn to someone next to you. I know, I just give some of you a little bit of a heart attack, but it's going to be okay. Turn to someone next to you or join a group of 3, and I want you to talk about what you see as different between these 2 texts, but specifically, is there any pearl of wisdom that the difference between these 2 highlights that might be helpful in thinking about our world today? All right, let's come back together. I love that you don't want to stop talking to each other. That's good. So, love to hear just a couple of gems from folks to share what you were thinking. What did you come up with? Yeah? Someone just pointed at you, your partner. Do you want to share?
Yeah, we talked about the theme of injustice
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The basic point was in the second part, somebody stood up for what was right, and in the first part, no one did. No one did. What else? There was all those great conversations. There must be more to share. Yeah, nice and loud.
So in the first part, it seems like Pinchas just jumped to a conclusion without asking God first, might this be the right way to go? And then in the second part, Moses came, was the intermediary with God. Why did that happen
Yeah.
before the Pinchas died?
Now, to be fair, this was my editing of the book, so God's actually very happy with Pinchas, which is the thing that's uncomfortable, right? That was unfair. I didn't include that. So it was a great point, but it's actually important to say that God stops all this violence to reward Pinchas for what he did on behalf of God, and so I think about that as a verse that I'm like, ooh, that makes me very uncomfortable that God is condoning this kind of zealotry and violence. And it's why, as a liberal reader of text, I can say, you know what? That's not in my values. And this second part is. I can engage Torah that way. I don't have to say, oh, well, I guess it was right to do that. Yeah. Here to help the needy, not the greedy. I like that. Yeah. Cantor? Yes. Yes. Right. When we see things in Torah that make us uncomfortable, one possible thing to do is notice our reaction and say, well, maybe this is here to show me what I should do, but maybe it's here to actually give me that reaction and go, ooh, that's not who we want to be. Right? We have a problem with zealots right now in our world. We are moving to extremes. There is too much violence. They dealt with it then too. Yet the daughters of Zelophehad, they stood up, they spoke truth to power, they fought for justice, but they did it in a different way. Any other final comments? Yeah.
I saw something entirely different.
Great.
What I saw was that in both scenarios, the women were treated equally to the men.
Huh.
So I saw this as a very women's liberating, both of them very they both, the women got in trouble in the first one on the
Yeah.
one hand, the women were elevated to have equal property to the brothers as the men.
That is so. Did everyone hear that? That in both stories, the women were actually treated the same as the men in the end. Even though in the first one, it's through violence that there's actually a kind of equality. I've never thought of that before. That's very interesting. Thank you. Okay, yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. So we don't, and actually, she probably was not a willing participant. So that does kind of bring a problem to your argument, but it was still an interesting one. But the Torah is speaking in euphemisms here, and I am too, because of not everyone in the room is ready for that. But we can be still uncomfortable with that, and it's important. Okay. Well, on that note, thank you for studying a little Torah with me on this Shabbat.